What's going on, guys? Welcome to Tactical Thursday. This week we are diving in on how to build a better bobber. As a fly fisherman, I'm not too huge on fishing bobbers, but I have been getting a lot into lake fishing lately. Especially this coming weekend, I have a competition coming up which features 2 river venues and then 2 lake venues. And I've been trying to practice my lake stuff, and one of the techniques we commonly use in the lake is a dry dropper technique. And in the competitive environment, you're not allowed to use an actual bobber, or a strike indicator as people like to call it. But and so instead you have to have a hook point on everything. So instead we tie flies that are bobbers or strike indicators. They have a hook point, but they also are just there to simply act as the bobber of the strike indicator, and then we usually put 2 flies below that at various depths. It's a very good way to pick up fish, especially when they're not moving a whole lot. The other method is to pull lures or pull nymphs, which works and is a lot of fun. To me, it's more fun than dry dropping. Not that dry dropping is not fun, because when you catch a lot of fish on it, you catch a lot of fish in general. I mean, it's a lot of fun, but dry dropping can put a lot of fish in the net for sure. And it is a blast when you do hook a fish, especially trout in a lake. They fight insane. It's unreal. But so what we're doing today is we're trying to build a better bobber. I've been having some issues in the past. I've been fishing a different couple of flies as a strike indicator or a bobber, and I was previously using a booby fly, which has like 2 little foam heads. I had one good one that floated well and worked well. The problem is that it was yellow, and when it was glare you couldn't see it. So I wanted something with a little bit bigger profile and something that floated a little bit better, a little higher in the water. So I have 2 different bobbers we're fishing. The one on the right is made of egg yarn. It's got a foam strip, and then it's made of egg yarn. It's 2-tone. That way I can pick it up in different things. The other one is made of poly yarn. So these 2 guys are going to be duking it out, and we're going to see which one builds the better bobber. I've heard both work. I previously have fished this by itself. Actually, I fished both before and had them both sink. However, I don't think I was using the proper floating and stuff. Basically, they both have 1 strip of foam on the bottom, and then the egg yarn or the poly yarn and the 2-tone. And we're going to run a couple of tests and see which one works better. So basically what we do is we're going to take the fly and some gink, and we're just going to put gink on either side of the fly, rub it throughout the material, and drop it in to a container. We'll bob it up and down, slosh the water around, and we're going to see how much they can float just free, nothing attached to them, just the flies free, and see how long they can float for. Five and a half hours later, they still bob back up. So the next test is to take it out to the lake. I've previously had flies float in a container, then you take them to the lake, you add a couple of nymphs below them, maybe some tungsten beads, and you find that they sink in the lake. So we took them out I'm going to take them out to the lake, fish them a little bit, hopefully catch some fish. That way you get the experience of the bobber going up and down, plus it getting completely submerged when you set on a fish, and we'll see how it holds up to that. So some of my big takeaways, they both float. I'll tell you that. They both float. I will say that they don't float equally as well. I will say that the poly yarn fly floats better than the one made out of egg yarn. And the reasoning for that, as I'll roll a few clips, the poly yarns stays much drier. Even still, this is about see that, focus that in. This is about 2 or 3 hours after I fished it, and you can't see it very well, but it's still wet. This fly is still wet, and this one is bone dry. And even when you notice when you're fishing, when you pull this off the water, even if it was submerged, it's still fairly dry. This fly gets soaked, as you see, and I'll wring it out. I'll wring it out, and you can see the water just dripping from it. Also, when it comes to fishing choppy water, I was fortunate enough to fish in some windy conditions and some still water conditions today, as the weather was kind of back and forth. In both conditions, I would actually say you could probably see the egg yarn bobber better in the still conditions. I think it's a little bit brighter than the poly yarn. I will say that the poly yarn sits way higher. And it sits upright. It sits with the hook point down. The egg yarn fly sits on its side for some reason, and the hook point's not down. It's on the surface. So yeah, but when you get it into some chop, the poly yarn bobber sits very high in the water. It bobs up and down with the current, staying on top. The egg yarn doesn't. It bobs up and down underneath the water, and you don't know if it's the wave doing it or if it's a fish pulling it up and down. So you can't really have that. You don't really want to miss a strike because of the chop. You don't want to constantly be stressing out like, hey, is that a fish? Is not. For me, the poly yarn did a better job at that. Also, one of the tactics we use when we're dry dropping is you don't just cast out and sit there. You sit there for a while, and then you start slowly pulling it towards you, and pulling the line towards you, moving your flies underneath a little bit. That kind of action drives the fish insane, triggers a strike. I noticed that the poly yarn, you can pull nice across the water. Both stay on top of the water, but you pull nice and slow. I'll say that. The poly yarn leader, you can pop it and pop it, kind of get a jigging action in your flies, and it'll still stay on the surface. The egg yarn, on the other hand, doesn't happen. You can pop it, and it does come back up, but it goes underneath the water when you pop it. Plus, it doesn't bob fully back up. It stays a little bit farther down in the water, and it soaks up even more, and it starts to sink a little bit. You can still kind of see it underneath the surface, but if you have low light conditions or a glare or something, you're not going to be able to see it underneath the surface of the water. So in the end, I have to say that the poly yarn takes the cake. This is basically bone dry. I didn't even have to, I put gink on it once, and I didn't have to reapply. I had multiple fish. I probably caught 5 or 6 bluegills on it, and maybe a largemouth bass. I might have caught that on the egg yarn, I'm not sure. And still floated. The egg yarn, it still floated throughout the remainder, or like I said, sat lower in the water column. To me, it wasn't as easy to see, and I wasn't as confident with my strike detection with the egg yarn as I was with the poly yarn. So when it comes to building a better bobber, I'd say go with the poly yarn instead of the egg yarn. Yes, both can work. Maybe it would be useful to have both in your arsenal, but if you need just one, I would pick the poly yarn one. Thanks guys for checking out this week of Thursday Tactical Tips. Please leave a comment down in the description, like and subscribe. I'd love to know your thoughts. Do you have any experience fishing the two? Is it just insane to fish a bobber on a fly rod? I don't know. It's a great way for me to catch fish in competition, which helps my placing and whatnot, so I'm going to do it. It definitely is a lot of fun if you haven't tried it. I've been in that mindset too, where it's like, hey, it sounds like it's dumb, stock fish in a lake. It's a lot of fun. You should definitely give it a try. Build some bobbers, put some squirms underneath them, bobber and worm fish with a fly rod, and see you next time.